Hi, I'm Cody Anderson, one of the pastors at Parker United Methodist Church. On Sunday, we talked about the story of Jacob and Esau. Now, it is a really big story. It takes up 10 chapters in the book of Genesis. So there was a lot to cover, and we tried to cover the high points, the things that were really important, but one of the little things that we did leave out that is probably one of the greatest stories about Jacob is Jacob wrestling with a man. Or some say Jacob wrestled with an angel, or even Jacob wrestled with God. It is actually just 10 verses that is found in this whole story, but it is such an important story for us to think about. So if you remember the story of Jacob and Esau are brothers. They have this like love-hate relationship with one another, but things kind of start to go bad when Jacob tricks Esau into giving him his birthright, right? Esau comes in from hunting and he's famished. He's starving. Jacob just happens to have this pot of stew going and his brother wants some. But Jacob doesn't just give it to him, right? Like most brothers probably also wouldn't, right? They want something in return. And so Jacob asks for Esau's birthright. So Jacob gets that birthright and Esau gets some stew. And then the most damaging thing happens. Jacob dresses up as his brother and he tricks his father into giving him this blessing that was meant for Esau. Well, when Esau finds this out, he's devastated. He's beyond angry and probably wants to kill his brother. And so Jacob flees for his life. He leaves everything behind and he goes so that he can be safe. And you remember, like, there's this moment after he flees where he falls asleep with a rock as his pillow, and he's in the most vulnerable space in this moment, but God appears to him in a dream and speaks to him, giving him a blessing. Not because Jacob earned it, because Jacob is a mess, but God enters into Jacob's story in that moment, in that messy space, in that rock bottom place, and gives Jacob a blessing, something that he didn't earn. But God saying, I am with you even in this place. And so Jacob goes on with his life and gets married. He has children. He gets wealth, but there's still something missing. It's that relationship that he has with Esau. So years later, he decides to go back. And if you remember, he, in preparation with meeting with his brother, he sends a whole bunch of gifts to Esau to try to maybe soften him up a little bit. And then he separates all of his wealth and his family, and he sends them in different directions so that if they're attacked, that not all of them will die. And then Esau finds himself with a few of his family members, but he's kind of off a little bit alone. And it is in this place that he wrestles with a man. It says that Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then the man said, let me go, for the day is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. And then the man said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. And then Jacob asked him, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And then he blessed him. And so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. So Jacob wrestles with this man. He's still trying to receive a blessing. He's still trying to take something, right? He's fighting to know who he is. He's fighting for his identity. And he's wrestling with this man who he perceives to be God. And it makes me think about the times when I've wrestled with God. The times where I have wrestled in my own faith, trying to understand something that is elusive to me, trying to maybe fight with God a little bit and make God tell me something or give me a blessing, right? When have you wrestled with God? When have you wrestled with your faith? When have you had to give everything that you had to be able to understand just a little bit more? Jacob finds himself in this space, this moment before he meets Esau, and he is still wrestling with who he is, maybe his actions that he has done and the harm that he's caused. He still is seeking and wrestling. And I believe that God rewards Jacob in this moment with that blessing, but also telling Jacob exactly who he is, this new name, Israel, right? He identifies Jacob in this moment. God says to Jacob exactly who you will be, who you are, chosen, loved. And I think that it's in the moments where we wrestle with God that we hear those same words, that we understand our identity a little bit more. We begin to see ourselves in God's eyes. And that doesn't mean the wrestling is easy. In fact, it can be painful. It can be exhausting. We can even end up with an injury or two that stays with us for the rest of our lives. But if we keep wrestling with God, if we keep seeking out God, if we keep trying to understand more and build this relationship with God, then we will receive a blessing of identity, a blessing of understanding maybe a little bit deeper of who God is, a blessing to know that God is with us, even in those places when we wrestle. Sometimes we're afraid to wrestle, right? We're afraid to ask the questions because we feel like we need to know, or that we should know, right? If we're following God, we should know who God is. If we're following God, we shouldn't have questions or doubts. We should just have certainty. But there's a huge difference within that, right? Because faith is not always certain. It's a belief inside of us. And there's going to be times where we have doubts. There's going to be times where we doubt who God is, or if God can do something, or if God is even with us. There's going to be times where we wrestle with the pain that we've caused to others, the harm that we have caused, and trying to understand if we're even worth God's blessing at all. There are going to be times where we wrestle with the world around us and wondering if God even cares. There are going to be times where we wrestle. We have doubts and questions. And it's important for us to be honest about that, to share that story with others. Jacob doesn't just forget this moment. He names the place. He names that place where he wrestled with God, Peniel. For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. And it's important that Jacob does that, not only for himself, but for the generations to come after. A story about not being afraid to wrestle with God, not to be afraid to wrestle with doubts and questions and needing to know our identity in Christ. So my friends, it's an invitation for you to wrestle, an invitation for you to seek God in a new way. And yes, it might be hard, but it is an important piece of our faith. For when we wrestle with God, we know our identity a little bit more. We know that we are God's beloved child, and that God will never leave us but always be with us. So wrestle, and then share your story. Name the place and share it with others so that they can understand that it's okay to wrestle with God. They can understand that it's okay to have doubts and questions, because God will continue to love and be with them too. So let's be like Jacob, maybe just in this moment, and be okay to wrestle.